Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name's Steve, and it is time to... We're kind of prepping ourselves for the next 3 weeks, because in the following weeks, we're going to be looking at exactly what you're looking here on the screen. We're going to be looking at picking from picks 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12 in your drafts, picking from the early spot, the middle spot, the late spot, working from a 12-person draft. That's just the most common. So first of all, what are you looking at on the screen right now is going to help. What I did for the information that you will be looking at, we're going to be looking at a couple of different things here, but it all stems from a similar two different ways of looking at the same information, is that I've taken each of the players via position and charted where they get taken in the draft via either their ADP or via the ranking of their EDP, their draft spot specifically. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is via ADP, as you can see by the name of the chart. And I like this one a little bit more. I think it's a little more accurate by being less precise, because there is, so many things that go on. We all know that no two drafts look alike. They're like snowflakes. And depending on the group of people you're drafting with, depending on just how the players start to fall off the board and what the other players that you are drafting with, who they like more than others, some guys will fall in your draft that got taken much earlier in other drafts, etc. So the thing about BIA rank is that you're going to see this has 4 players in each grouping here. So picks 1 through 4, the top 4 players to go are 3 wide receivers and 1 running back, whereas via ADP it's 2 wide receivers, 1 running back. There is no player with an ADP. By the way, the ADP we're using is based off of ESPN, the average of ESPN's sleepers, underdogs, and Fantasy Pros, all of their ADPs, the average of those 4. So hopefully a pretty accurate ADP. And you can see we only get 3 players here with an ADP of 4 or less, which leaves us with 5 players. That's what these numbers are at the bottom here, out of all the positions that are being drafted with an ADP of 8 or less, or really truly 8 or more than 4, less than 8, more than 4. So that is how I ended up charting these. And what I wanted to start off with here, showing you this, because we're not going to look at this too much longer, is just that when I have this bottom number here highlighted in red, which I have, that's the tally of the via ADP, the number of players getting drafted late, mid, early in each round of this draft, is that the red means that you're drafting from a deficit. There isn't really enough talent according to ADP to verify, like for the 4th player on the board here, you're kind of taken from the same pool in a sense as the picks 5 through 8, because most likely 2 wide receivers, 1 running back, these 3 have already been taken off of the board, but maybe not. Maybe you get one that falls to you, so it's a little bit nuanced. But in general, and that's why we're just talking about from picks 1 through 4, you're going to be picking from a deficit. When you see this is uncolored, it's just kind of neutral. And when it's green like this, you're picking from a surplus of talent. There's more talent available there via the ADP than can be actually drafted by this point in the draft. So the base is 4. Each of these, 4, 8 total, 12 total, 16 total is how this works, but we're keeping this in a deficit. So I think just basically looking at this, the best area of the draft, value-wise, talent-wise, what you should expect to have there to draft from is going to be the middle portion of the draft, picks 5 through 8. Specifically, I've narrowed it down to, I think pick 8 is like going to be your most valuable spot to draft from. So the reason I picked this is pretty clear. You're starting the draft in round 1, just picking from a normal amount of talent. There's enough there for you to choose from. Technically speaking, maybe there's enough there for you to choose from, because 4 will get taken here. And then running through a deficit at both, early, mid draft. Here we go. Neutral for a moment there in the 4th round, picks 9 through 12. That sounds about right to me as somebody who's going to be picking from that area of their primary draft. Round 4, I want to reach for a couple of guys. However, I just find myself not quite being able to reach for someone who might get taken by round 5 on me. because of the talent that is still on the board. There's like one or two guys that I'm looking at that I'm like, yeah, it's hard to, you know, even though I really like this guy and I want him on my team, it's hard to reach for him when there's still this player available. Then you can see a little bit of a surplus here, round 5, picks 5 through 8, the middle of the draft. First portion getting in round 8, going back to a neutral stance before. For the rest of the draft, everybody's drafting from a surplus. And the other main thing that I want to point out from this is that in your draft, I don't think you should be reaching, and to an extent, of course, but like, you know, don't go 2 rounds too early on anybody. From rounds 1 through really 8. You're picking from a lack of enough talent available already. Obviously, don't just draft a guy because he's next up on your draft sheet that you didn't even create on your own. I'm not saying that. Just like I'm not saying once you get into the surplus, draft a guy who's not expected to get drafted in the 9th round, because now I'm saying it's okay to reach. It's okay to reach within reason, 2, maybe 3 rounds if it's a guy who's really volatile. Sometimes they get taken earlier. You specifically know that have a hunch that somebody in your league might be interested in them as well. Start to reach in the 9th round. That's where I'm giving you the okay to reach. But until then, stick to the ADP board within reason, still getting players that you want for the most part through those rounds. Start to get a little bit more wild in the later rounds. So we'll look at these closer once we get to looking at the early, mid, late round picks, each one in the following weeks. We'll look at drafting from those spots. So now that brings us to this ADP heat map that I have. By the way, all this information can be found up on the website, because this is all stuff that you got to take away what you want to take away from it. I don't want to tell you too much exactly what to take away from it. I am pointing out a couple of tips and things that I noticed. And in the end here, I'm going to walk you through like an evolution of using this information to form a draft strategy off of it. And we'll go from the 6th pick. I'll show you like an evolution over 3 stages from this information that I'm taking. But I also wanted to show you that you can find this information up on the website, theFFForge.com, link down in the description. Under the analysis tab, I will have it right above here, the stack information that you could have gotten previously as well. You can also find my rankings for each position. I got to get the overall rankings redone, and then I'll put them up here soon. But you can find each of the individual wide receiver rankings available for you, positional rankings available for you as well under the rankings tab, of course. And soon enough, I will get a printable draft sheet if you wanted to use my rankings, which I'll talk about that in a future video. So let's stay on topic here. Here are the ADP hotspots based on draft spot, based on ADP. I think I've explained it. You know, based on ADP means I explained it. It's based on the ADP. It's not forcing 4 players to get taken in the first 4 picks of the draft or 12 players to get taken in round 1. So that's where you see when we're based on draft spot. 204 players in a 17-round draft would get taken. That's 12 times 17. 12 players for each round specifically allocated. Now, if we just look based on ADP, the variance shifts things, and as we get into that surplus later on in the draft, not every same player gets drafted in every league. There will be players available on the waiver wire in your league that were drafted in the 13th round in some other leagues, that kind of thing. So I have 227 players here. I did actually cut down the tight ends down to like 24, so I allotted 2 per team in a 12-team league. DSTs, I allotted like 1.5 or so. Some people won't draft a DST. Some people might draft 2, that kind of thing. And depending on your league, you might have to draft them, like ESPN forces that. And then kickers, I have just 12 kickers there. So there were more kickers. There was like probably 245 players or something like that originally, but I cut them down just a little bit to get this more looking like what your draft would actually look like at the end of the day. But yeah, you'll see, you know, it's not going to be 12 players per round here. And so you can see that via ADP, I have that those numbers over on the side there. So let's start with the ADP map. As we were just looking at the ADP overall, it's clear wide receivers are hot early on, even more so when you look over on this left side rounds 1 through 7, really. But wide receivers are hot early. Then I think that you walk into this strong group of tight ends, and then I'm someone who thinks that there's value in holding strong, waiting on tight end. However, I do see it a little bit differently this year. There's a good, strong group, and there's not just one or two of them, so you're not just going to be, like, by missing out on them, you're not just going to be working at a deficit compared to one or two teams in your league that you hopefully just don't face in the playoffs or something like that. Instead, now about half of your league is going to be able to get a similarly talented tight end that's at the top of the position. We got 2, 4, 8 tight ends there. I think it is 2, 4, 8. Yeah, going in the first 6 rounds, starting in round 3. This is more tight ends than you typically would see. In previous years, the tight end number 1 has been going in the first round, second round, a little bit earlier, which was incorrect. But we've learned that lesson. But now this tight end tier starts to kick in, and I think that is pushing these running backs back. As you can see, right after we get out of this hot spot from the tight ends here, all of a sudden the running backs kick into the only hot spot over several rounds that there is in the draft via ADP. One more spot there later on. So I think that is something that is happening to the running back talent, meaning that you're finding some value possibly in these 7th through 9th rounds at running back. Then from that point forward, it's just kind of like a hodgepodge at the running back position, hot, coldness going all over the place. But we'll see that tends to spread out a little bit more evenly once we start to force these running backs to get taken at certain slots within the draft. Saying first, based on the draft spot here, if you want to peek over there. Then looking at the DSTs here and the kickers, they're all picked by the 14th round. I just want to point out that I think that is mostly because of ESPN's ADPs forcing players to take a kicker and a DST, which always get taken like at the end of the draft there. I think that is a result of that because there's only so many ADPs for defenses, kickers on the other sites that I use. Some of them don't even have a kicker or whatever DST. So that's what's happening here. They just kind of got punched right at the end there. Obviously, in your draft, it might get spread out a little bit more, like we see ends up happening over here once we force them to get drafted at a certain point. So there are some overall views of the draft. Wide receivers early, tight ends start to go. Strong group of tight ends this year, which is pushing the running backs backwards a little ways, which is causing, I think, a group of value to be had here. And that's really the strong, notable positional takeaways that I get from this draft, just looking at the overall charts. Now, when we look a little bit more specifically at an example of what's most likely to happen, despite the fact that this almost certainly will not occur exactly like this in your draft, via ADP, this is what's most likely to happen. And so now you can see that the running backs go much more evenly spread out, really hardly any hot spots. Technically speaking, a hot spot here in the 2nd round and in the 11th round, but almost every round, seeing about 4 running backs go throughout the entirety of the draft with a couple of cold spots later on. So you see that get spread out more. And I think that if you have targets that you want to ensure that you get as running backs, the evidence shows that you most likely should be concerned about getting them being taken in rounds 2 and 7 through 9. So if you want to zig while the board zags, then you're going to want to attack them here in the 1st round. And rounds 6 and 7 is what I've kind of come to in order to just get ahead of if your running backs, are coming, you're expecting them to be getting taken off the board 7 through 8, basically, or in that 2nd round, you want to ensure that you get them, attack them there, zig while everybody else is zagging. Then when you compare the tight ends charts here, so comparing this chart to this chart over here, I think that the 6th round is going to be your sweet spot. So right here, just going for the end of a tier of these first 8 tight ends that come off of the board. This could get in the way a little bit of your running back zig and zag, but this is why you're going to come up with a strategy, and then we're going to fine-tune it from there to see what we feel comfortable with for how we want to build our own roster specifically. And I'm going to show you an example of how I would want to build it with using some of this information to help start a strategy. So as you can see, I have this first 7 rounds of the wide receiver drafts highlighted here. You can see that the wide receivers are just, they're a hot commodity. They're getting taken early, and I really don't disagree with this. So I think that the early 8th round, I wanted to see like what's getting taken towards the end of this run on wide receivers, who's still available at the tail end of this tier, you could even say. And I do think that it is like a tail end of a tier there that lasts for a few rounds, but it's players like Xavier Worthy, Christian Watson, Ladd McConkey are the guys who are going to probably be available for you most likely in this 8th round. So depending on what you think of those types of that group of wide receivers, those are the guys you're looking at. Rounds 2, 4, and 5 might offer you a little bit of a zig factor, while the rest of the talent, the rest of your league zags. And out of the first 8 rounds, or 7 rounds, 8 rounds, 2, 4, 5, just like that are the areas to attack the wide receiver position. Not fully objective, you know. Then, if you're looking at your DSTs, if your favorite DST is still on the board here after this first group of like 4 get taken, this is when you could attack. Remember, I said it's fine to reach at this point. If you're suspecting that they could go at any point in this group of DSTs, as you can see here, like, yeah, they very well might. The ADP on them, the ADP on them has them all getting taken fairly early. So there's no like sure thing that your DST is going to make it, especially if they're like the next 4, 5 maybe or so that are supposed to be taken off the board there. When you get to your 12th round, go right ahead, take them if you just want to ensure that you get your guy if you believe strongly in a DST. Now looking at the quarterbacks, the top 6 go in the first 5 rounds. There you can see 2, 4, 6, or over here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the next tier begins really immediately after that in the 6th round. Quite possibly ADP has a push backwards into the 7th round. So a little bit of variance as to what quarterback might be getting taken here in the 6th round if one happens to go. But if you want to start to zig while the rest of your draft zags, I think going in for that 6th round is going to be a chance where you might be able to get. You're probably not going to be drafting at the end of a tier, but at the beginning of a tier. And then you can see after those top 6 go, the next hotspot begins like immediately. Well, the next tier begins. It doesn't really come to a conclusion until you reach like the 12th round or so, just to look at via the ADPs. So yeah, you know, there's a bit of a rush at both ends here, rounds 10, 11, and rounds 6 and 7, really capping each end of this next tier of quarterbacks where they're most likely to get taken. All right, so generally speaking, if I were to not be water, which is what I suggest you do within the draft, and just pre-plan exactly how I'm going to be drafting and follow that plan to a T. If I want to zig while everybody else zags, I think that my draft plan might look like the following. Let me show you. All right, so just so you can see everything, I've cleared myself off of the board, and here it is. If you want to zig while zagging, I came up with the order of running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver. So I did this on Sleeper, and I just took the highest player via the Sleeper's ADP at the position that I said I would be drafting from. So as you see, running back, Bijan Robinson, wide receiver, Drake London, Derrick Henry, Michael Pittman, Tank Dell, Kyler Murray, Evan Ingram, DeAndre Hopkins there for the first 8 rounds. I did 8 rounds in part specifically because I said, like, once you get to the 9th round, feel free to free ball it. Feel free to do what feels best to you. Get your guys at that point. Now, doing this method, of course, I don't agree with everything. I felt most the biggest thing that stood out to me while doing this draft, because I do think that I would be happy with this team. It's not like these are all my guys, and I would have probably taken a player or two differently. But if this is what I ended up with at the end of the day, I would feel pretty good about things. I would, however, I did feel like taking Kyler. I was taking at the top of a tier for the quarterback position, and I really don't want to feel like I'm taking from the top of a tier at the quarterback position. So I probably would have made a different decision there in the 8th round as well with DeAndre Hopkins. However, I was happy enough with the following 2 running backs after that. Part of the reason I might have made a different decision there is looking at the running back room. But then when I found out what I ended up getting for running back, it was Devin Singletary and, I don't know, maybe Brian Robinson or something like that. I'm like, oh, that's not so shabby. And that's what I'm talking about, too. We're seeing the reality of how this running back position works is that, yeah, some of that running back talent is getting pushed backwards. And there is some solid guys getting taken, what did I say, 7th through 9th round, and I think even 8th through 10th round. Still some of those are going to be available. So that's picking from the 5th spot. I did that randomly in terms of picking from the 5th spot. There was no ideology behind it. And so I also then picked from a 10th spot, just kind of the opposite of picking from the 5 spot. Picking later on in the draft. Did the same thing, running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, running back, then after that. But that was just my choices after that. But following the template here from pick 10, not as jazzed about this team. I don't quite like it as much, but there are factors about it that I do like. Anthony Richardson, now I feel like I got at the back end of a tier, a different tier from Kyler Murray. I'm much more excited about that. For Brock Bowers, I'm pretty sure Evan Ingram was still available there. Maybe not. I like Evan Ingram more than Brock Bowers. Maybe he wasn't, though, in that scenario. Ladd McConkey, I do like quite a bit. Probably, I think I could have taken him instead of DeAndre Hopkins, though. I think DeAndre just might have gotten taken in that scenario. I don't remember. Maybe Ladd's got a higher ADP. But, yeah, in this situation, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, Brock Bowers are all picks specifically that I probably would have gone a different route with. But I like Chris Olave would have been the guy instead of Devontae Adams there probably. So it's not to say that there weren't guys there that I liked quite a bit. Just they weren't via ADP the next step. So that's what it looks like when we're zigging and zagging. But if we wanted to go with the crowd, take the most popular picks that are being taken at each of these positions, I came up with wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, running back for the first 8 rounds there. And if you were following that, you may have noticed that I went off script here with my 4th and 5th round pick that's supposed to be quarterback, wide receiver. I went wide receiver, quarterback. And that's just because I saw on my board that, like, if I were to go Anthony Richardson there at the end of the 4th round, I mean, look, I was able to get him at 6'3". If I would have gone with him 4'10", that's really reaching. I was pretty darn confident that he's going to make it around to my 5'3" pick. That's still a round earlier than I was able to get him from pick 10 there. And so I did make a manual adjustment there. Ended up with CeeDee Lamb, Travis Etienne, Nico Collins, Cooper Kupp. Really love that. That's a strong wide receiver group, or it has at least the potential to be a very strong wide receiver group. The running backs, we got Etienne, and then later on we get Najee Harris, Zach Moss. I think that has, especially with this wide receiver group, Najee Harris, Zach Moss, really technically only need one of them to come through for me as a true RB2. Then I think that there's a pretty decent chance that could come together just fine. I don't hate it. There are other running backs I like more, but it is what it is. Brock Bowers, don't love that. But yeah, like I said, I had to do a little bit of a manual swap because it only made sense to there with the wide receiver quarterback. But at pick 8, I was able to follow the template perfectly. Wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, running back to smooth things over. A.J. Brown, Williams, Deebo Samuel, Lamar Jackson, Keenan Allen yet again there, Kyle Pitts, Zamir White, and Javonte Williams to wrap that up. And for this group, Keenan Allen, Kyle Pitts, Javonte Williams, I may have wanted to go in a different direction with, but I was happy enough with the available wide receivers as well in rounds 9 and 10 there. Wide receivers I do think are going in this draft, and there is a point where I really don't like the wide receivers anymore, and it's earlier this year than most years. But there are a few guys throughout the final 6-7 rounds of the draft that I'm okay with. And I guess that starts around round 11. So when zigging and zagging, I prefer this method from the earlier picks of the draft. And when going with the crowd, I preferred it a little bit more from that later pick. However, I don't know about that. That's what I wrote down. But when I look at them now, so I like Zamir White stronger. I might take pick 3 there, actually, and just try to ride with that instead, even though I'm feeling a little less comfortable with some things. That trio of wide receivers could be deadly. So, and in each scenario, Travis Etienne, Kyren Williams, I do have some concerns about both of them. So, fairly fine in both scenarios. I probably might like both of them more than the pick 10 zigzag, but the pick 5 zigzag I think is my overall strongest roster there that I feel the most confident in, even keeled even in a sense. So I did one more. I told you I'd do an example from pick 6 here. This is my ultimate combined what am I trying to think of? Zigzag type strategy. And what I did is I took this quarterback for round 1, and I averaged it out. This wide receiver is 7.5. You'll see round 1 wide receivers on average wide receivers taken in the first round. So I used an average of those to get my new hot spots, and then by doing that, I came with this ultimate zigzag strategy, which meant I was going to be taking a running back in the first round, a quarterback. Look at pick 6 on the far left there, the smallest one. That's my version 1 here. So I strictly adhered to the strategy. Running back, quarterback. So Breece Hall, Josh Allen. Then running back, wide receiver 2 in a row. That's Josh Jacobs, Cooper Kupp, George Pickens, James Conner at running back, Evan Ingram at tight end, and Rashee Rice at wide receiver there. And then you can see I got Austin Eckler there. So that's the ultimate combined zagging. If this is the roster, I could argue all day on why this is a really strong roster and why this could be a winning roster. But I could also argue against it. It's not all things that I loved here. So when I did this, the one thing that you know about me by now is that I do not argue to be taking quarterbacks early. I don't like to get the first quarterback off the board. The second round quarterback just isn't me. That's not how I'm going to be drafting. So take that off the board. And I really liked, I thought when I took Breece Hall that I kind of preferred getting a wide receiver there, and then maybe I could get a running back with that second round pick instead of Josh Allen. So I went in with that mindset. So I got Ja'Marr Chase at pick 6. Happy with that. I come around, and I was not in love with the running backs that were available there in the mid-second round compared to what I'm going to be coming into in later rounds. And at least, this is my thought process. And I really liked Chris Olave there. Was very happy to get him. So Ja'Marr Chase, Chris Olave to start it off with. And then we got running back, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook. I mean, I like James Cook almost more than Pacheco, so that works out perfectly fine for me there. Then we got T. Higgins in the 5th round, Evan Ingram there in the 6th round, kind of reaching for him in this scenario, but the reason that I did that was I looked at the board and I saw that Zamir White was the next running back that I wanted, and it was more likely that Zamir White would make it to my next pick than it was that Evan Ingram would. So I just went with the ADP on that. I do end up taking Evan Ingram early, even though he's available there in the 7th round. You can see in both those other drafts that I did, because I felt good about the running back, Zamir White still being available there. So took a risk to get a target that I actually prefer. And what's funny about this roster here is that I expect James Cook and Zamir White to be my starter running backs, my RB1 and my RB2 over Pacheco. So you can see I'm kind of feeling like I wasted that 3rd round pick because I'm thinking that he's my running back 3 compared to some other guys I was able to get. Then we finished up with Hopkins, Moss, 8th, 9th round, and Jaden Daniels in the 10th round. So I took something that I plan on doing getting Jayden Daniels later on in the draft and then probably pairing him up with Trevor Lawrence if possible. I think that's a really nice late duo of quarterbacks to get, just because I'm afraid of injury for Jayden Daniels. So there was my version 2. I wasn't 100% happy with this. If I'm able to get Chris Olave there in the second round, like it's like, and then feeling like I wasted that Isaiah Pacheco pick, feeling like I reached for Evan Ingram even though I shouldn't have to. So I went ahead and did one more. Went back to taking running back in the first round, despite some really good wide receiver talent being there, just because I think strategically later on in the draft it works better for me and who I'm comfortable with on my roster. So we start off with Bijan. Then I got Drake London there. Now here, I think I took the highest ADP with Drake London, but I do believe Chris Olave was still there, who I would personally take over Drake London. Ayuk in the next round, and then James Cook and Aaron Jones. I feel better, I think, about James Cook, Aaron Jones, and Isaiah Pacheco. James Cook are just as good, I should say. Maybe not better. Definitely not better, but just as good about it. I think Aaron Jones on a weekly basis has, just as good of a shot as Isaiah Pacheco for any kind of ADP or output of fantasy points. Then I was able to get Christian Kirk there in the 6th round like that. Evan Ingram back where I'm supposed to be getting him. So because I didn't get wide receiver in the 1st round, I pushed up that next wide receiver with Christian Kirk. I feel very comfortable about that. Hopkins, still feel fine about that, comfortable with that. Brian Robinson, there was Zach Moss was available there. There were options at the 9th round running back there that I could go. But for my number 4 running back, my number 4 wide receiver, Hopkins, Robinson, feeling pretty good about those. And then I got my quarterback there at the end. So you can just see the evolution here of how we can take what was running back, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, running back, tight end, wide receiver, seeing how that works out, and then tweaking it as we go and coming to this ultimate plan of kind of starting running back, wide receiver is really what that is. And then from there, we'll just follow how the board goes or whatever, but the starting off running back is I think that the biggest thing there, knowing that we're going to be able to, and then having the plan for the tight end in the 7th round and the quarterback in the 10th round are the kind of the key pieces here that stuck around in this planning. So I hope that this helps you to maybe tool around and figure out your own kind of strategy. Once again, no draft ends up being the same, and things you will be thrown some curveballs in your draft, almost certainly, that you're going to have to handle compared to any plan that you go in. So always be water, but I don't think that it hurts to have a couple of, you always have a backup plan, but a couple of keystones that you want to pull off. The Evan Ingram in the 7th round, I like that a lot. I feel more comfortable by taking the running back in the 1st round, even if I might have a wide receiver or 2 that I'd almost prefer over Bijan Robinson, even though I'd almost prefer to take wide receiver over running back with my first player. I'll get into that. Well, draft strategy-wise, the reason is because running backs are more prone to injury. So I'd rather have like the keystone, the centerpiece to my team be a wide receiver than a running back. But drafting from this 6th spot, this is just how I felt more comfortable about things. So yeah, once again, thank you very, very much for tuning on in. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That always really, really helps. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to get to them. Peace out.